Now, Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a international guest joining us now.
We do. We are honored to have my great friend of now 3 decades, believe it or not. We have been creating trouble around the world for at least 3 decades that we can admit. And so I'm honored to introduce to the Sunday with Charles and Crowdsource the Truth global audience, one Fabien Chalandon. Fabien, welcome to you, coming in from somewhere in Japan at an undisclosed location. Why don't we begin this portion of the show with just you saying something about your background and qualifications and activities in your own words. And welcome.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Charles. I'm happy to join Crowdsource the Truth show, which I've been following for quite a while and admiring the rather incredible job you both have done. And I think as a viewer, I have to thank you for that first. As far as I'm concerned, well, I'm a bit like Charles. I spent quite a number of years in investment banking in France, in England, in America. I also managed a few companies, even managed a family office. And I'm semi-retired now. That means I have some time to investigate matters which I think can be of relevance. And the reason I'm doing that is that I've been also involved on the side of politics. I worked for Mr. Chirac during his presidential campaign in 1994, and then I co-founded and co-managed a think tank in France, which actually was the first political independent think tank created in 1996, and which main job was to break taboos. And we are a bit in the center of that approach with Crowdsource the Truth. This, in essence, with this sort of two-folded view on things, business and politics, that I've been approaching Charles' work, which is incredible, which he has started single-handedly, and I can vouch for this because in 2015, Charles contacted me to raise my attention to this Clinton Foundation issue. I can't say I was a skeptic because I've been knowing Charles for a long time, and I know when he starts stirring a pot, it's serious. But I was actually interested and even very surprised to discover that there is a French angle to it. We call it The French Connection, which is a well-known film in the US. So I think it sits in the Congress Library today. There is in fact a very big French input to that whole Clinton Foundation issue. Oh, sorry, I think I'm losing you.
No, we're still here.
Can you see me?
Yes, yes. We've actually created a French Connection graphic just for you, Fabien. I'm showing that right now.
So basically, again, I would like to thank you, Charles, for this incredible and remarkable work you've done. And to finish on my presentation of what I've been doing, both Charles and I have worked probably close to 15 years together. We've been through a number of nice but also difficult business issues, some of them being close to hell. So basically, we know what we're talking about when it comes to fraud. And we've gone through together quite a few. So that's why I thank you both for the incredible work you've done in putting this whole thing public, which in essence is what has been achieved now over the past few months with your show.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Fabien. So Charles, should we get right back into the slides?
I think so, if we can.
Yes, absolutely.
So Fabien, as usual, you're being a bit modest, and perhaps some of the projects that we tackled together that maybe are worth the general public knowing about. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that we did in France with Madison Chart Energy, because I think that's an interesting story, which was really, a project that was very difficult. We went from, great promise to near disaster to ultimately making a decent amount of money in probably drilling for oil and gas in France itself. So
yes, I mean, France is certainly not known as the next OPEC country, and even 20 years ago when we started this venture with a US company, but it has some oil, especially near Paris, especially near Bordeaux, and especially in the sort of southwestern part near the Pyrenees. This is a venture which Charles and I put together, what was 1996, if I recall.
right.
We raised some money for about $15 million, if I recall well. We had a team of Americans who were very experienced not only in oil exploration, but also in exploring oil in France. They had quite a good track record, and that's what attracted us too. So basically, we raised the money, bought quite a few drilling rights around on the sort of eastern side of the French Parisian basin, so east of Paris, and we started drilling. And as usual in this type of business, things never goes the way you think it should go, and it never goes the way any way you would expect. And to come back to some of your key questions, there's what's happened, what should have happened, and what has actually happened. And that exactly the same rationale could be applied to this venture called Madison Chart. So basically, we spent all the money we could have, and basically got nothing. And we just had enough money to drill the last hole, but needed a bit more. At the same time, we discovered that our partner was skimming the company, which is not good. So we had to devise a rather extreme strategy, which was to threaten to get the company to bankruptcy court, to extract ourselves from our American partner. And that threat alone was sufficient, with another threat to actually go into criminal courts as well, because that was criminal. To actually force out.
You said someone was skimming from the company. Did you have a Bush family member involved in that?
That was a different project.
Sorry. That's another one. That's another one. No, that's another one. That was the next one.
Right.
We're not going to be talking about that one, Fabien.
But actually, technically I can, but it's okay. So basically, we forced our partner out from the management. We were controlling the company. We therefore were able to raise some money. Then we drilled the last hole and then a few others, and we found oil. And that obviously turned around the company. And then our partner, who did the stupid mistakes of going public, ended up into a weird situation whereby his only asset and the only cash flow he could get was the cash flow from the French company, or his portion of the French company. Therefore, he was forced to buy us out. And that's how we exited. And our shareholders were actually very happy and since we are also shareholders, we too.
So
But as you can see, it was a very twisted route to some kind of success, at least financial success.
Well, again, it's a long time ago, Fabien.
We managed to basically, whether that return did correspond to the risk, it's another issue, because we took a huge risk and a huge gamble, but it worked. Yeah. And it was a great teamwork. And Charles and I did actually an incredible work together on both sides of the Atlantic to get all the pieces of that puzzle back into the right place and the company moving.
Yeah.
That's, Charles, that would correspond to your recollection of this deal?
Well, I think, yeah, I just add that just to give you the rough sense of it, what Fabien was able to do with this family in France is we purchased the assets, the small remaining assets from the Rothschild family, and they gave up on the project, and we started with 27 barrels a day from memory of oil, which is not a lot. And when we sold it, we had gotten to 2,000 barrels a day, which
wow.
is at today's oil prices, we would be very happy. But prices went crazy. To get this done, we had to do basically a 100% debt finance acquisition, which we did. And it was just one of these things, as Fabien said, what should have happened didn't happen.
Right.
But in the end of the day, profit happened, so we were happy.
There you go.
So Fabien, one other thing that we spent a lot of time on this list, there are many, we could talk forever, but you were instrumental in helping us get the Irish buyout fund up and running, and that was the first institutionally backed by international investor buyout fund that came together in 1997. But one of the things we did out of there was there was an investment that we did together where we bought a distressed company that had a big Irish presence. It was an international company for virtually nothing. I forget what we paid exactly. I want to say it was like $4 million. It had been in bankruptcy and problems or whatever. And then Fabien and I got together and we had a good external manager. And that was great fun too, Fabien. That was a French-based company.
Company's name was Terraillon. It was one of the three large weighting companies in the world. It's still there. It's still well known. It had an incredible big market share in France, but also in the UK and to some extent in the US. But it was badly managed. As you said, went bankrupt several times. It was actually managed by Mr. Tapie, who was well known for being scavengers of companies, breaking them up, taking the good bits for him and leaving the rest into bankruptcy courts. And he became a minister under Mr. Mitterrand, member of the government, therefore. While being a minister, since he was not taking care of his companies, most of them went south. So we, at that point, picked up Terraillon for something close to the asset value. We had to restructure it. We brought in something totally incredible for French people, an Irish management, two Irish gentlemen who didn't speak a word of French, which didn't make things easy. But they both had in-depth experience of managing white good companies in the US, which was essential at that point to turn around the company. And they did a remarkable job in doing so. Yeah. We exited into a US listed company, which name I forgot.
Measurement Specialties.
MSI, Measurement Specialties, yes. And then they resold it to the Chinese supplier of electronics that go into these weighting machines a bit later. But basically we did a 55% internal rate of return over 6 years, which is not bad.
Quite good, as they say in French.
Très bien.
So Fabien, just to summarize, I mean, you're frequently a contributor to media platforms in Europe. You've written columns and articles and, spoken, and you're very modest about this, but I see that thread on your jacket there. I think you might have won a certain award at France that's important.
No, I received the so-called Légion d'honneur on the personal list of President Jacques Chirac. That's correct. I don't know why you should ask him.
Well, I did not. But Fabien today is, he's involved in a number of important whistleblowing projects. He travels between France and Japan, but you're spending the bulk of your time in Japan. And with that, I think what we might do is go to the next slide, where what have we been doing, Fabien? And I'll do a little bit of the talking here just to introduce it. We've been going country by country to compare the United States to various countries, to give people a sense for how uneven the distribution of economic results is around the world. People have this, the globalists in particular like to think that all countries are, big countries are all more or less the same, but in reality there are very stark differences, as we've seen in previous presentations. So what we do here, Fabien, to make it as comparable as possible, we have to go, the most recent year we can pick is 2015, because we don't have good comparable data across the mass of countries that we're talking about any later than that. And we like to start with the idea that if you're going to have economic growth in a country, it starts with its population growth. If you have very slow population growth, it's going to be difficult to achieve, particularly if it's a mature economy, rapid economic growth. So to begin with, and we just are doing comparative size, France, I think, might be the 20th largest country in terms of population at this time frame. But even so, still, it's a fifth the size of the American population. So when you're trying to come up with a big market to serve, and your population's only a fifth the size, that's going to be tough. And also because of a variety of factors, the median age in the United States and in France is very high. What that means, we see across country after country, is that as the median age of a country rises, its consumption patterns slow. People, as they age, spend less on consumption, generally speaking. So one thing that really always shocks me whenever I do this math, using UNCTAD, which is the UN, whatever it is, database, we're able to get good data translated to dollars, breaking apart GDP into components. And the French propensity to consume is lower by a significant factor per person than it is in the United States. So in the United States, because we borrow so much to fund consumption, which is bad, we spend $38,000 a person on consumption in the United States. France, a large market, only spends $21,000 officially. Now maybe that's because people are buying stuff in France, not on the real market, or who knows. But
there is one reason for that, Charles. The state takes half of whatever amount is earned.
High taxes.
Right.
Taxes and social security payments. So.
Would you like, we can help France out, would you like me to arrange to give Manhattan and New York City and maybe even New York State back to France?
Sorry?
If we gave New York City and maybe even New York State back to France, then we'd have a whole bunch of people who are happy with really high taxes all living together.
Right, yeah. But New York high taxes, are relative compared to France. Okay, so for New Yorkers, New York taxes would be quite low compared to France.
Well, you know that
if you look at the total social security and tax levied by the government, it's it's one of the two highest in the world. I think now it's even higher than Sweden, so it's number one in Europe, and it's about close to 52 or 54% of national income.
That's pretty high.
Yeah,
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
So at that point, New Yorkers would leave. I think at that point, New Yorkers would leave New York.
Yeah,
that might be a good thing. So then, Fabien, what we do what we're trying to demonstrate is that the countries that seem to be populated at high government level and elite level with people who are globalists tend to be countries that have large exports compared to the size of their local consumption. So you see in the United States, our exports are large at $3.7 trillion, but our consumption is 12.3. So exports are only 30% of internal consumption. The international market is relevant, but it's not like, without it we can't survive. Whereas in France, it's 54, your exports are 54% of your local consumption. So it's easy to see why French government, French elites would say, yeah, globalism, not a bad idea. In particular, France is on the Security Council. France is already well established around the world, a leading country in many places. So globalism is going to make more sense in France than it's going to make in the United States. Letting everybody into the global tent. And then the other thing that I've noticed, doing this for many countries, there's a great chart that looks at the capacity utilization inside the United States, and it shows that our capacity utilization is probably less than 80%. So we have, using long time series data, it's not shown here, we're operating at only less than 80% of capacity. If you're at less than 80% of capacity, why would you invest? I mean, you have a lot of spare capacity. You don't really need to invest. So we're investing, our total investment, our hard investing in goods and in capital goods, capital projects, is only 19% of our consumption, whereas in France, it's 41%. So that can mean this investment includes state-sponsored investment and private investment. This can mean there's bad, malinvestment in France. It could also mean there's not enough investment in the United States in, let's say, public works. But it places a French company at a competitive disadvantage. If you've got high taxes, low internal consumption, a reliance on export markets, a need to invest a lot of capital, it's going to be tougher to serve the global market than it would be from a U.S. platform where you're serving the U.S. market first, earning high profits on that, and then sprinkling around to France and other markets. So it's just useful for our viewers to see the differences. And what we do, I'm not whooping up on France, Fabien, I'm just trying to many of our listeners are not terribly good with numbers. So to make it easy for them to go through all this stuff, when you see in the comparison slide a red number, that's bad for France. Urban concentration, I was surprised to see this, Fabien, that the United States, 81%, 82% of our population is based in cities, and France is 79.5. I would have thought it would be higher in France than it is, but evidently not. It's not that different. But what is different is the number of doctors you have per 100,000 people is much higher than ours, and the number of hospital beds for some reason also higher. Now that could mean that you have a big social bureaucracy in the public health system. It could also mean that maybe we have too few doctors and not enough hospital beds. I don't know. But I found that interesting.
The truth is probably a bit in between, because obviously I think America does not have enough doctors, especially generalists, from what I've read. It has too many specialists compared to generalists, and the generalist function is essential. In France, we probably have too many doctors, but they are not present in insufficient numbers in certain cities, or most importantly, they are not present in enough big numbers in the countryside. And as far as hospitals are concerned, we obviously have too many hospitals. It was even worse a few years ago, because now the hospital system is currently being restructured, and a number of local hospitals were barely surviving, and more importantly, were becoming dangerous, because if you take, for example, a maternity, if a maternity gives birth only twice a week, the experience curve of these doctors and nurses is not enough, and it actually becomes dangerous for the patients. So that's why you need to have an experienced set of nurses and doctors to have a high level of activity, and local hospitals therefore must disappear, or at least be restructured on certain number of specialties. Each one has a specialty, but a local hospital cannot cover everything, and that's one of the problems in France. So I'm not surprised by these figures, and adding insult to injury in France, hospitals have a layer of bureaucracy which is way too high, with people who don't work enough, and most of them are actually civil servants, and for years governments tried to restructure them, but it's been a very slow process. They're absorbing too many resources compared to the actual resources going to the medical practice. Sorry for that.
That's great, Fabien. So just in the bottom here, we put the sources, so you can look at this at your leisure. One source is the UNCTAD database, and the other source is the CIA World Factbook, that's an index of all of them. The CIA World Factbook, I'm sure, the public edition is not as detailed as the private edition, which of course I've never seen, but people have told me about it. But it's a great resource.
Of course you've never seen it, Charles.
I have never seen it. So what we might do, Fabien, is jump to the next slide, which here we talk about how Unitaid came to be. And I'm happy to navigate through this unless you want to do it. Either way.
Please, since you did write this chart, it's probably easier for you to comment it, and then I can add anything you think of relevance to what you've done.
Great. So Unitaid, it's important to understand that Unitaid, which is a large organization, came into existence, into formal existence, 3 years after the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, and 5 years after the Global Fund to fight AIDS, etc., were in being. So this thing came together in 2006, and there are various schools of thought as to whether it was actually needed when it came together. There are critics who say, PEPFAR was having difficulty, Global Fund was having difficulty spending the immense amounts of money. I think in the early round of Global Fund, it was 15 billion they raised. And PEPFAR, Global Fund, was, I forget what it was exactly, but it was an order of magnitude, 10, 15 billion for that, and PEPFAR was another 10, 15 billion. Unitaid, when it first came together, was another like 300 million a year. So some said, well, why do we even need this? We're having difficulty putting this all together. And it came together under French sponsorship by a man called Philippe Douste-Blazy, who himself is a doctor. I believe he's a heart doctor, isn't he? He's a cardiologist, I think.
So yeah, you've been
Philippe Douste-Blazy. Can you hear me?
Mr. Douste-Blazy, yes.
Yeah, I
Mr.
think
Douste-Blazy. He's a former doctor,
right,
and a politician.
Right. So he became the first, I think, chairman of Unitaid, while he was also serving as French foreign minister, I believe, for a short period. So
actually, well, for a year and a half, which is quite unusual.
Yeah, and as a medical doctor, and as a powerful politician, he should have been able to see the flaws here. And the chief flaw that we're going to dwell on in coming minutes here is that as Unitaid was coming together, the idea was that the monies that flowed into the Unitaid coffers would be then turned around and sent only to organizations, they called them implementing partners, that had already been established, were already doing good work, were already serving the poorest countries in the world, and that all the Unitaid money would go not to overhead, but just to incremental projects that these implementing partners couldn't do. That was the thesis. And the biggest initial recipient of Unitaid largesse in 2006 to 2009 was an entity that didn't exist, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative from 2006 to 2009.
Charles, I understood that Unitaid had something to do with charging like $30 to every person who flew from the United States to France. Is that incorrect?
So
no, it's not quite correct, actually. It's Mr. Deux de Blazy, backed by Mr. Chirac, I have to say, raised an interesting idea, which is to tax a very small amount of dollars or euro on every traveling ticket, plane ticket bought.
Mm-hmm.
It's called, now there's a new term for that, it's called a micro tax. Micro tax is a tax you don't see, that you don't feel, basically, until it hurts a lot. So this was a very unfortunate idea because it could probably give new ideas to a number of people around the world, okay, or a number of governments around the world. And that concept of micro tax was actually implemented by France at the end of, it was voted by the parliament at the end of December 2005. It was then later adopted by, I think, Korea, if I recall, and maybe another country. But it ran out of success quickly, thank God. Yeah. The problem is that France is the country which raised the most out of it and basically became a 60% funder of Unitaid. If you look at the figures overall from 2006 to today, France has funded around 60% of Unitaid. And Unitaid, especially in the early years, became the major source of funding for Clinton Foundation and its entities, and we probably will go into that, Charles, but if you look at the annual reports of Unitaid, there are at least 6 or 7 different names used for the same entity, so there's a problem.
That's the way the Clintons like to do it.
that's right. That's how they roll. So if we could go back into the slide there. So this, if we could hit the Amazon link, we've had this up before. I would have brought this book in, and I don't know, Fabien, if you've had a chance to read this book?
Power in Numbers.
I'm started about, I'm about 20 pages in, but I'm finishing off first a detailed timeline, which runs into about 60 pages, which is currently in French, which will be later in English. And it's a timeline which addresses all the issues surrounding the Clinton Foundation, including the political potatoes you have currently, for example, the FISA document, the FBI behavior versus the Clinton Foundation, etc., etc. And as you know, I'm quite thorough, so that's why I'm putting this together, because it provides then an instant document to go back to when you are asking, questions about how events unfolded and what kind of sequence they unfolded. But also, it gives interesting leads into further questioning of how this whole thing happened, should have happened, or actually happened.
Good. Well, so this book, Fabien, and just for Jason's benefit and our viewers, it's really worth reading because it came out, I believe it came out in like January, February timeframe, maybe March 2010. Just as events that we will shortly discover and discuss were being played out, which is to say, just as the Clinton Foundation was, in I think our view, illegally reorganized, likely with the knowledge of the Obama administration's Department of Justice, IRS, and other regulatory authorities. So it's I think as this plays out, it's really going to raise a lot of eyebrows, not simply in France, but in the United States and around the world, why so many different famous people got associated with rank fraud, and rather than disciplining the people and stopping the fraud, they decide, yeah, we'll just cover it up and give it even more money. So that's never a good story. So if we go back into the slides, we don't have to hit the one on the annual reports or the regular financial and operating reports, but it's worth hitting this detailed board minute resolution link here. And Fabien, I know, has been, if we go down the page a little bit, Fabien's been through here in excruciating detail. You could hit any one of this, but you hit this one here, please. This gives you a sense of what, the French and Philippe Duplessis were pretty well organized. This is an authorization around Thanksgiving time 2006 to give a whole bunch of money to something that didn't exist, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. There's no such entity. But UNITAID had a board meeting where a bunch of famous people decided that they were going to allocate. How much money do you see there?
45 million?
And then another?
81 million.
In the following year. All right? And it says the lead recipient of this money are suppliers, right? So drug companies. So maybe Ranbaxy, the crooked drug company that was under investigation starting around now, and that people should have understood was a crooked company, and that ultimately paid a $500 million fine. There you go, Ranbaxy. There's their company car. Their driver, Wild Bill. So if we go back into that resolution, if possible.
Yeah.
Next one. Here. I think in the next page, if you scroll down, it issues some, next page, I think. Yeah. Conditions. I don't know how this went into French from there. It's interesting. So,
You speak
it
French.
has. I think I can read this. I think what this is saying. This is in French. It's interesting. They're trying to confuse the English reader. What this is saying that the conditions giving this money it's contingent upon Chai entering into proper legal arrangements in every country where they're going to do this, which they didn't do, because they couldn't do, because they didn't exist.
Maybe they can't read French either.
But no, it's the kind of thing I know from dealing with Fabien, not just how Fabien works, but we've done a lot of work together in France, that when you enter into agreements that have to work across a large number of countries, including France, you've got to be very good about it. If you're going to set up, a subsidiary of Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative in a foreign country, generally what you have to do, laws are different, is you have to represent in that foreign country to some authority that you are a subsidiary of a validly organized and operated charity. And somewhere in the file in France and Switzerland and elsewhere in these countries, there must be these false representations with signatures on them that are probably notarized. And in France, they take notarization far more seriously than we do in the United States.
Well, I was going to say, in my experience, France is generally very organized, and usually people are super into sticking to the rules.
Right. You would agree with that, Fabien?
Can you hear us?
Yes,
there?
yes. No, I would, yeah. But I wanted to interject a bit on the issue of what you call the board minutes. In fact, the major issue is that at least between 2006 and 2010 included, UNITAID sent $297 million to an entity which doesn't exist. So that's a problem. Okay? And it's a big problem, as we say in French, big problem. And it has to be justified. And now we can go back into the issue of why we think the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. didn't exist. There are plenty of evidence for that. And there's also a merger into the Clinton Foundation, which was supposed to have existed but in fact probably didn't existed, even if it was actually properly registered in Arkansas. But the company which was merging, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative Inc., was never liquidated, and the merger agreement was therefore never executed. So there are plenty of legal reasons to think that this entire issue of merger was botched up and to say the least, a big mess. Now, the problem is we also have the same big mess at Unitate, because and Charles and I have been doing due diligence in companies and for a number of occasions, and sometimes we ask lawyers to do the legal side, sometimes we do it ourselves. But we are experienced enough to immediately see if a company is well managed, looking at the board minutes, looking at its contracts, and looking at the way it implement any conditions attached to the implementation of the contract. Now, just looking at the board minutes over the period 2006 to 2010, December 2010, there are, I say I guess because I'm not sure, which is a problem, big problem. Okay? Because Unitate, what I forgot to say, publishes its board minutes or extracts of resolutions or both into its website, and it has a policy of being totally transparent. As you're going to see, it's not exactly the case. Out of 15 board minutes over that period, there are, if I recall, 8 missing. So it's more than half.
Wow.
Okay. Also, you should know board minutes are numbered. I've chaired a few companies, including a few public ones. So I know, you have to number the board minutes to avoid forgeries. Okay. Now, 2 board minutes have the same number at Unitate, which is a problem. Yeah. Some board minutes are not even numbered, and a bit later, I think 2011, a board minute at the end of the year in December has, I recall, I may be wrong, but just to give you a sense, it has number 18, and the number 17 is in the early part of that year, and then it is followed by number 19 and 20 and 21 before you reach number 18 at the end of the year. So the numbers do not fit the chronological order, which is also a problem. Okay, normally, if you in a normal company, if you see that, you instantly think fraud. Yeah, immediately. And I think, Charles, you wouldn't say the contrary.
No, absolutely. Fraud.
A company that is not able to actually manage properly
or count,
that's already a sign that something is very wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to get into the details of this specific issue, but I think everyone, your listeners, should be interested to know that we too can actually dig quite seriously into matters of such detail, but usually the devil is in the detail.
On that front, we won't go into this presentation, but we'll just say no aspersions are meant here against the great country of India or the great country of the Philippines. But the selection by Unitate of an auditor based in Manila and then based in New Delhi, the decision to pay that auditor less than $50,000 to evaluate all this work, and the fact that Unitate has no operations in either the Philippines or India just does raise a few eyebrows.
What's the normal fee you would expect for an audit of an organization like this?
Wow, this one, operations in 50 countries. I mean, today you would probably be looking at, I'm not an expert on this, but I'd say $750,000, $1 million to do it right. I mean, just plain fare.
And 50,000.
Versus less than 50,000.
Well, you got an auditor who can't count or keep the pages in order, you get a discount.
No, if it's just like 50,000, here's a pen, sign your name.
Wow. It's good work if you can get it, Charles.
Well, remember that Chai and Clinton Foundation are specialized into one thing, driving down the prices of drugs. So they may have also managed to do that for their audits. But that's Chai.
The audit was about as effective as Ranbaxy's pharmaceuticals, so that may in fact be true. That may in fact be what happened.
Yeah, it's an adulterated audit.
Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to add to just what you said, because you were mentioning the accounts, Charles, if I may. As you know, transparent companies not only have accounts, and you need an accountant to do the accounts, but have auditors, outside auditors, who check if the accounts have been properly put together and do reflect the reality of the company. Well, United has a very strange concept or philosophy as far as its accounts are concerned, and at least between 2006 and 2012. First, they approved in June 2009 their 2006 and 2007 accounts unaudited. They did not audit their accounts for 2 years, and then it took them a year and a half to have them put together and approved by the board. That's not good. That's not good. No. Any company that does that run into problems at one stage or the other. Then the second thing is that a bit later, in 2010, the board approved audited accounts for 2008 and 2009, and I say 2008 and 2009, and I'll come back to that. But the auditors, which you mentioned being the General Controller of the Philippines, this one is General Controller of India. India not being a country well known for its auditing practices, that's for sure. So these accounts, to these accounts were also attached the 2006 and 2007 accounts, which until now were unaudited, and they were this time audited and restated. Now, when you restate accounts, even if it's not a very big number, that means that the accounts issued before were not right. Okay? Correct me, Charles, if I'm wrong.
You're absolutely right.
Okay? So that's the second point. The third point is that they've produced for the years 2007, 2008, and then 2008 and 2009, biannual accounts. That's a new concept for companies. Instead of producing accounts for 1 year, they produce accounts for 2 years, which is strange. Usually you use 12 months as your standard accounting period. Now, apparently that's the policy of WHO and of the UN.
Biannual auditing is done by the
which
UN.
Is quite strange. And also I've discovered in that process that the UN and therefore the WHO have a special set of accounts by the UN. So it's neither US GAAP, the European,
we lost you there for a second.
AIS.
We lost you there for a second. You're saying the UN and the World Health Organization have a special set of accounting parameters?
Yes, and which they use for the purpose of setting up their accounts, which is neither US GAAP, as Charles would know by heart, nor the European standard, which is called IAS. So it's a third one.
It's ASS.
AS, yes, ASS. Now, I've not looked into the details of the principles behind these sets of accounts because I couldn't find it. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what are the standards used by the UN and WHO, the accounting standards they use. They should use either US GAAP or the IAS GAAP.
Well, they've got the the WHWW, whatever the hell we want.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Now, somebody, since United, after a few years of going through that, I would say, on that unreasonable process of setting up its accounts, managed to set up an audit committee. That audit committee raised the issue of, why don't we go back simply to standard practices in terms of at least our accounting year and select 12 months instead of 24. So starting, I think, 2012, United finally got to the bottom of that. But, for you and I, gentlemen, it would be quite natural to take 12 months. And why on earth WHO and the UN are using 24 months is a mystery for me. And that's, I think, it's public money. It's not acceptable.
Right. Well, I think I can answer part of that question. In this time frame, if you think back to it, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, foreign currency exchange rates against the euro, against the dollar were moving like crazy. And so if you're basically a potentially crooked organization that's sending a lot of money around the world and is not using the kind of controls we would come to expect, and there's these volatile conditions, that's a recipe to steal money. You can backdate invoices, you can divert money, and so with everything else that we know about the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Charities, to see this in one of the big donors is vexing. And yet it could also be an opportunity, a point where the United States and the Trump administration and France with Mr. Macron coming here in April, and both France and the United States having an interest in promoting good governance practices in multilateral organizations. This could be good timing to put this under the microscope, to put the Global Fund under the microscope, which is an even bigger mess. Indeed, to put the WHO under the microscope. I mean, this is a good test point. If this is this screwed up, hosted inside the WHO alongside other organizations, think what the WHO books look like. Think what the UN books look like.
So where is Macron as far as his feelings about Mr. Trump?
I don't know. Do you have a
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But I think, actually they're probably closer than French presidents were with US presidents for quite a while.
Wow.
Because they both were elected against the tide. Both. Macron was elected against the tide, or at least against the establishment.
And wasn't Le Pen a little bit more politically aligned with Mr. Trump in terms of her?
I wouldn't say that because Le Pen. Well, there's Mr. Le Pen, the father, and then there's Le Pen, the daughter.
Yeah.
Now, the father had some strange views about history, especially what happened to Jews in Germany. By basically, saying it never happened. So that, he lost a lot of credibility with that. The daughter has a better appearance and therefore credibility. But Mr. Trump never said he would close the borders, U.S. borders. Mrs. Le Pen did, or at least it's implied in the economic plan she has. And since she has no sense of economy, she would have managed France into bankruptcy basically quite quickly, which I don't think Mr. Trump would, because he's been running businesses. Mrs. Le Pen has never run any business.
And Fabien, I'm sorry if this is a little bit unrelated to our general discussion, but how would you say the average person in Japan feels about President Trump? I would think rather positive, his good relationship with Shinzo Abe.
It's, there are, at least, I would split that in two. In the university circles, which obviously my wife and I are seeing a bit more because she's a university professor here in Japan. There is a rather high degree of skepticism, which is biased by what you would call in the US fake news of the mainstream media. And some of them know what I'm doing with Charles for quite a while on this issue of Clinton Foundation and fake news. So when I explain them what's actually happening versus what may have happened in their mind or should have happened and hasn't happened, they actually, discover new things which they never thought about because they don't know. So there's a high degree of manipulation and disinformation because of the mainstream media in the US.
Might call that faux news.
The man in the street wouldn't be really, an opponent of Mr. Trump because Japan is a nationalistic country, whether you like it or not, and it's not an aggressive country, but it has a high sense of national identity and does not want any immigration. That's very clear. Okay, and it's highly controlled, and I can vouch for that because I'm a foreigner. I'm a gaijin in Japan, and I can measure exactly how they control it, and it's with a tight fist.
Well, but at least you got kaiten sushi there, so there's that.
Yes.
So I'm mindful of the time. We've been going now for about an hour.
Yes.
And we've discussed, in red here. Sorry.
No, sorry. We wanted to mention Cour des Comptes, no? Well,
yeah, we're getting to that. We're getting to that.
Oh, you're getting. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So here we have in red, and most of our viewers know all of these points because we've done multiple shows. But for the new viewers, we summarize the many diligence failures that the French and other donors must have made once they made a commitment to continue supporting UNITAID and let UNITAID give money to this entity that didn't exist. UNITAID was only supposed to give money to lawful charities that were actually organized and operated. They were supposed to reach the poorest of the poor nations. They weren't supposed to go to Massachusetts. They weren't supposed to go to London.
Is not a poor nation?
No, I mean, it's got other problems, but but the way, if you read the organization documents of UNITAID, which are on file, and the various resolutions, a very small percentage is allowed to go to, like medium low income. Nothing is supposed to go to Massachusetts. It's inside the United States. So, the auditors weren't involved looking at this crucial period, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, when Hillary Clinton was, running for re-election as a senator and then for trying to be a president, should have demanded an accounting of all sums out of UNITAID to the Clinton Foundation in particular, wire transfer amount, date, purpose, where did the money go? And they should have been able to check, and I know because I've watched Fabien do it, and I've done it around the world. The first thing you do when you're talking about giving money to somebody else to do something is you make sure that somebody else can actually do it. And to be a charity, you've actually got to file a lot of paperwork. So there's no evidence the Clinton Foundation was ever authorized to do any international work, to control any activities outside the U.S., and certainly not to fight HIV/AIDS. And as Fabien said in his timeline, I'm sure we won't go through 60 pages of it, but the real name of the entity that UNITAID was in theory supposed to give money to was called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. And that entity was illegally organized on March 24th, 2004. And there's no proof that it was ever validly federally tax exempt or tax exempt in Massachusetts or tax exempt anywhere in the United States or tax exempt anywhere in the world. And this is the kind of thing you can check. It's a matter of fact. You have to file, you have to register. So why didn't anybody do that? Or if they did try to do that, are there any memos in the missing board minutes of board members saying, you know, we had this diligence firm try to check it out, and they came back and said, when we pulled the papers and we asked the person at the registrar for all the papers, nothing happened, because there weren't any.
Maybe they realized the diligence firm was mattress firm.
Exactly. And so, as Fabien said, there was never any merger of this entity into the parent company. There is abundant evidence that you can see, you should have been able to see back then, that there were gross violation. The headquarters operation in Massachusetts was shut down by the Commonwealth. We call some states states and some Commonwealth. Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. It was shut down on March 31st, 2008.
Why?
Because it didn't ever file any of the forms it's
So,
supposed
but why did they stop there? I mean, if Massachusetts knew that something screwy was up, why did they just shut it down and not pursue any other kind of legal?
Because Hillary Clinton was going to be president of the United States in March of 2008. She was still a leading contender.
I think Michael Smith wrote to the Massachusetts state regulator recently, and they responded that they shut it down. They shut down the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative because it had never filed its IRS 990s and nor any of its normal documents to be filed for the preceding 3 years. That's why they shut it down.
Yeah, and
That's what he wrote.
Yeah, and you're referring there to our friend, and we'll probably someday do a show with you and Michael Smith, but Michael Smith is the great Australian investigative journalist, former police detective, and now very determined investigative researcher who's done I don't know how many different articles in this, and he's helped, I think, excite the interest of the Australian authorities to track down what did happen to the many 100 million or so of Australian money that went towards these frauds.
He's actually called the FBI or something, right? And opened some kind of official investigation. That's amazing. That's great.
Right. Perhaps in part because of what we've all been doing together. So
wonderful.
The final thing is that there is a memo, we've talked about it before, where the internal staff in 2015, it came out of the WikiLeaks dumps in 2016, the acting CEO of the Clinton Foundation, after Eric Braverman resigned and disappeared, writes a memo saying, when we've had problems in the past with these CHI managers, but when in July 2008, Ira Magaziner, one of the guys who helped set up CHI, and the CEO of the Clinton Foundation reported in July of 2008 that $23 million had been, they say, diverted. The correct word is stolen or embezzled. The decision was in 2008, just as Unitate sending more and more money to the Clinton Foundation, I think it was the biggest contribution in 2008, to just cover it up. To take, they say that we covered up the 23 million by taking 23 million out of another illegal fund that we hadn't disclosed to make the books work.
Well, I guess it just depends on what your definition of embezzling is.
That's right. So if we go to the next slide.
It's bad. It's very bad.
It's very bad.
Next slide.
So if we could make the type a little smaller, if that's possible. Yeah, that's great. So Fabien, do you want me to rush through this, or do you want to take this?
No, please do. I think it's probably faster to do it, and then I can always intervene.
Okay.
Because you have your own way of describing things. Which
Okay.
different from ours.
So what I'll do is I'll just, for the listener and viewer who has not really been through this before, we'll take this pretty quickly. But what did happen in 2009, once Hillary Clinton got stuck in as Secretary of State, and while I would say she's evil, Lois Lerner, who was a disgraceful individual who sat on top of the IRS department that overlooks charities, while they were beginning to start a process of persecuting, it is alleged, conservative-backed charities, the illegal reorganization of the Clinton Foundation started. So on the 29th of September 2009, the Clinton Foundation created an entity with the same sort of acronym that sounds similar to Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, they call it Clinton Health Access Initiative, and they use the same acronym CHAI. And when you start seeing that in a charity, you know there's a problem. What they're trying to do there is confuse people who are not detail-oriented. You hear chai, you're giving to chai, you don't ask whether it's an old chai, a new chai, non-existent chai. You just give the money to chai, because it's not your money. You took it from the travelers.
Double vente chai, you don't know what it is.
Grande macchiato.
Right.
Anyway, and in this, a technical thing here that I want to stress for our viewers that happened shortly after 29 September 2009, this new chai was supposed to be what's called a public charity. In other words, it was supposed to be independent, broadly representative of the American public at large, not controlled by any family or person for life. But they appointed Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner as trustees of this new thing for life. You're not allowed to do that, but they did it. And they then submitted this false and materially misleading application to the IRS to get federal tax exemption of this new chai. And they claimed that it wasn't a successor to any other preceding operations. And the forms are actually really rigorous. When you tick the box and say you are a successor, there's a schedule that asks all these persnickety questions of, okay, what did you do? What was the name of the entity? Where did it operate? How much money did it have? Who were the people? Did it have any problem? And it goes on and on and on and on. But they solved that problem by just saying, no, we're not a successor.
I mean, the organization of this charity is almost like a Monty Python sketch.
Right.
Like, it's not the same. It's the same name. No, it isn't.
That's right. This parrot is dead. So
it's resting.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther. Is it your dog? No,
Right.
no, it's not my dog.
Doesn't bite. The dog doesn't bite.
My dog doesn't bite.
Right. So
My charity doesn't fraud. Yes.
So we won't go through all these links because we're already an hour and 10 minutes into it. But the IRS application for federal tax exemption, which is available, and we have found it, is purposefully omitted from the Clinton Foundation website. It's not on the Clinton Foundation website. It's not on the CHAI website. You find it in New York State. You can find it in California. You can find it in Massachusetts. You can find it various places. The one place you're not going to find it is in where it should be, in the Clinton Foundation main portal, right?
And that's legally, they have to give it to the public, right?
Well, if you're a public charity and if you're continuously soliciting, the way the IRS hopes that the public will discipline such a public charity is to have access to all of the documents that are in real time of the charity. And if you restrict access, that's, to me, prima facie evidence that you're trying to cover something up. And here, this is, you put everything in the dark closet corner over here with the Clinton Foundation. You say, here's everything, this is my real charity, but you put your fake operations somewhere else. And that's what they did. So they've never disclosed, and this is an interesting link of the many to hit, this one here, Jason. They've never disclosed, they have a new thing that they've changed in the Clinton Foundation website. They put this thing up recently. And they say, well, in some of the states, here's how you figure out what happened. But, in our country, we've got Arkansas, and in Arkansas, if you want to be a federally tax exempt, they say, here, if you want any of this stuff, contact us, right? The Clinton Foundation, because we'll be sure that we're not going to answer your questions. But if you want to try to get it from a state, they tick off a list of states. Well, we have many, many states that start before Florida. You have Arkansas, you have Alabama, and a lot of no contact for that. And I can tell you there are big problems in Arkansas. To operate a charity, an Arkansas nonprofit corporation, not only do you have to be federally tax exempt, but Arkansas law requires you to be state tax exempt in Arkansas. There's no evidence that they ever completed validly the registration forms for that. So this is something not to dwell upon, but it's a new link that I thought we should look at. In Mississippi, however, you see this, why they want you to call the Mississippi Secretary of State's office, because when you do that, what you're going to find out is the Clinton Foundation has been disciplined 3 times in the state of Mississippi.
Wow.
Without fessing up to that to all the other states where you're required to tell each other state its problems.
So why do they want you to call? That doesn't seem
Because, I don't know, I mean, the same person who suggested that Hillary Clinton should begin her campaign in a Scooby-Doo van probably was in charge of this thing.
So you call them and they say, there was no information, there is no information in my email.
Right, exactly, sent or received.
Right.
So if we go back into it, let's see. There are just so many, in summary, so many defects that are obvious in the public domain and should have been obvious to this effort led by the French Cour des Comptes that began to review the problems at the Clinton Foundation, at Unitaid, and at this CHI in December of 2009. So just when they were doing this reorganization, right? Just when, on January 1st, 2010, the Clinton Foundation spun out these predecessor operations into New CHI, and the IRS, on the 15th of March 2010, gave this New CHI a tax exemption, a federal tax exemption, when it should never have gotten federal tax exemption. This is precisely when the Cour des Comptes began its work. And with that, Fabien, maybe you could spend just a few minutes explaining what the Cour des Comptes is, and because we don't have such a thing yet in the United States.
Now, the Cour des Comptes first is a respected body in France, and has been a respected body since it was, I think, founded by Napoleon.
Wow.
It's formed by civil servants who have, in fact, the statute of being judges. They have two functions. The Cour des Comptes has two functions. The first one is to audit public accounts, but also accounts of private entities who receive public money. As you know, in France, almost everybody receives public money, so basically anyone could be audited by the Cour des Comptes. And I'm half joking only, unfortunately. That's the first function, and they are pretty good at it. I would say they are damn good at it. Okay. Two former Cour des Comptes members are actually well known as President Chirac and President Hollande. I will not add anything else on these two gentlemen. The second function of Cour des Comptes is to advise the government on policy issues. They basically break down any type of policies, analyze it and recommend to the government actions. And usually when they take a subject at heart, that means it really needs serious action. They also are pretty good at that. Now, Cour des Comptes has also limitations in what it can do. It is only competent and only has investigative powers in France, but not outside of France. Okay. So that has a bearing on our Unitaid matter, because Unitaid, as probably most people wouldn't know, that is not a legal entity. It's a program of WHO. Second thing is that Unitaid personnel and assets benefit from the privileges and what you call immunities granted by international treaties to UN personnel and assets. That means that you can't sue them. Yeah? And the way Unitaid has interpreted this clause, which could be challenged probably in court, and especially in US courts, is that privileges and immunities extend to anyone involved in helping Unitaid to implement its program, which for example, could imply that the Clinton Foundation benefits from such immunities, which is a problem.
Yeah.
At least it is my personal reading. And again, I'm, like Charles, not a lawyer, but I've read two documents which are of interest in these matters, which are somewhat contradictory. One is a legal analysis by the Hudson Institute, which is available on the internet, which breaks down some of these issues. And the other one is an interesting board minute, lengthy board minute, in relation to the creation, incorporation, and operations of Millennium, which is this foundation UNITAID created a few years ago, and where there's an extensive discussion of their so-called legal exposure to lawsuits by people whose health would be damaged by medication distributed by UNITAID. So, to come back to Cour des Comptes, when they did their audit of UNITAID, first they didn't do an audit of CHI, or Clinton Foundation, or Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. Their motto and their objective was to do an audit of UNITAID. And they obviously ran into a problem with WHO. They were not allowed to access any documents within the UN remit. They didn't get any help for setting up meetings. So they didn't get any help from anyone to check what they wanted to check, which is basically how the French money was used by UNITAID. Now, there's also another problem, is that in terms of audits, there's the so-called principle of unicity of audit, which means that a body cannot be audited by two different audit firms. It has to be audited by one. And WHO has its auditors, very well-known auditors, as Charles noticed today again. One is the Controller General of India, and later we will see the Controller General of the Philippines, which is even better at audits, as everybody knows.
Because Ukraine was not available?
I think it's the next one in line, most probably. So, basically, Cour des Comptes did a very difficult job without being able to access some of the key documentations that would be required. Nevertheless, from what I've read in detail, they sent teams in New York, in Boston, in Washington, in Geneva, in London, in New York, in India, in Madagascar, in Mali, and in the Dominican Republic. And they met about 150 people involved with UNITAID, one way or the other. Okay. Now, and if you want, Charles, should I get into what they found, basically?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on UNITAID, but also their conclusions on the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative and Clinton Foundation, which are, I think, of interest to anyone. On UNITAID, what did they find? They found first that there was, I would call, an absence of internal and external controls. Okay, so I think it's a meaningful way of expressing there were no controls at all. And that's for the period 2006 to 2010. There was also, and I'm translating into plain English, what is actually in plain French, having, with one caveat, is that the Cour des Comptes people are masters of understatement. Okay. So, in plain French, with that caveat, the second point would be the absence of any conflict of interest, identification and resolving procedures. Right? And I'm still talking about United, not yet on Clinton Foundation. The third one would be, is actually and I just, ladies and gentlemen, just sit quietly in on your respective chairs. Okay? Because the third one is the impossibility to assess whether prescribed drugs have been delivered with the contracted quality and safety specifications before their safe due date, and whether they're even complying with their transport and storage specifications. The implication being that nobody knows, basically, whether people who received drugs actually got the right drugs.
Or to put it in French, nobody knows what the F happened.
Yeah. Yes. I was just, and I don't know what is the policy of the show on using, let's say, plain words to describe this, but that's basically serious.
Please speak freely.
Yeah.
Now, the fourth one, and again, please buckle up your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. It's the impossibility to establish and control whether the disbursed funds have been expensed in compliance with the original agreement with United. So basically, in plain terms, is nobody knows how the money was spent, because nobody knows how to control it.
That's quite crazy.
And the last point would be, or is, the impossibility to diagnose whether the performance claimed by the distributing partner, for example, Clinton Foundation, has in fact been realized. And some of the performance claims are in the area of, for example, the number of drugs distributed, or the reduction in price obtained, or even the number of patients treated in any given country. That's what we call, Charles and Jason, a problem, because that's the essence of the program.
Right.
And now, last but not least, is the absence of any activity and financial reporting from the distributing partners to United. That is also a big problem, we say in French. Right. Now, so in essence, Cour des Comptes wrote, what the is going on?
Yeah.
And this is a very understated way of, again, raising hell.
And we're going to put this up, Fabien. You were the one who chased this stuff down for us. We're going to put this up and links, these actual reports that are in French. There's several of them. There's a first one, and then I think there's a second one, and then there's also testimony before one body or another. We'll put all those links up there.
Yeah. How this happened, before I move to Clinton Foundation, which is also interesting. At the end of 2009, it is the French Parliament, and mainly the head of its finance committee, Mr. Emmanueli, who asked Cour des Comptes to investigate United. Okay? While Cour des Comptes can actually decide on its own to investigate anyone, this came from a political order. And Cour des Comptes took about 1 year to investigate and write its report. And then there were hearings headed by Mr. Emmanueli, and with Cour des Comptes present, and being heard were a number of French civil servants handling the French aid system, which is mainly multilateral, bearing in mind that Mr. Trump does not like multilateral aid, and French love it, but with UNITAID, they are starting to realize that multilateral aid is actually not a good thing. Okay, so they would be inclined to think under the same lines than Mr. Trump on this matter, based on the UNITAID failure or problem alone. On these hearings, we also heard Mr. Deux, yeah? And Mr. Deux was told, you better increase or put up controls, which he sort of acquiesced. I'm not saying admitted, but acquiesced, which I think in English is slightly different. So sort of reluctantly agreed that there may have been a problem. Now, obviously, Mr. Deux was either very blind or very stupid. I let the viewer deduct what would be my thinking on this matter. Now, let's go to, if I may, Charles and Jason, to the Clinton Foundation. Now, just to remind, roughly, the Clinton Foundation, well, what we call in our jargon, Old CHI, which is the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc., created in 2004, Charles, if I recall, supposedly merged on December 21st, it was December 31st, 2005, into the Clinton Foundation, but in fact never liquidated, and which license was revoked by the state of Massachusetts effective December 31st, 2007.
Effective December, you're right. Effective December 31st, 2007, you're right.
Effective 2007, so that's the first body we're talking about. That body received $297 million from UNITAID, which by any measure is a rather large amount of money.
Not to Jason.
So, what Cour des Comptes says about all that? Basically, Cour des Comptes says that there is an absence of disclosure on its results, its accounts, and its means.
Amazing.
Talking about Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. So in one sentence, it's already very bad. Yeah, that means that basically this body, this entity is operating in full absence of transparency, and almost willingly, or clearly willingly and knowingly.
They seem to be lying about virtually everything.
Well, it's not said black and white like that, but when you say, when an audit body says something of that nature of any entity, it doesn't look good. Okay, doesn't look good at all. Second thing, the Cour des Comptes writes is, and I quote, the absence of internal controls. The third one is the absence of conflict of interest control procedures. That reminds you something? A bit earlier on UNITAID?
It does.
Okay, so the absence of conflict of interest control procedures. That's bad. And finally, which is even worse, but as we've already noticed with UNITAID, Cour des Comptes states that they say that there is an absence of reporting to UNITAID. So that's not good either.
Yeah. So I'm almost speechless, Fabien, but what we'd like to do, we'd like to put up on the screen the numbers that the Clinton Foundation has been trying to hide from the general public about just what may have been going on with Old Chai in the time frame you're talking about. We have those numbers. So,
the numbers of money sent, yes, we have that number.
so no, I'm just gonna. We put this. I don't know if you can see it. It's slide. Is this 10 or
Was it slide
page
10 of
nine.
this one?
page 9?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I'll run through this quickly and give you a chance to absorb it, Fabien.
Please.
So basically, what this is, the Clinton Foundation on its main web page puts its quotes audits for years 2007, 8, and 9 up linked on that page, but they purposefully omit what are called combining statements for the entities within the Clinton Foundation for 2007, 8, and 9, because they don't want you to see these numbers. Okay, but we found them, and we also previously showed people how to get them. These combining statements have a column that say there's this entity, Old Chai, the one that Fabien's talking about, Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. And they identify very precisely, in more depth than we're going to do now, how much money of the grants, these would be government grants, how much of the government grants that came into the Clinton Foundation went to this entity called Old Chai. And in the red numbers, Jason, I'll ask you, because I know you like numbers.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a small percentage of all grants?
Well, it's looking like it's close to 100%.
Right. So virtually 100% of all the grants that came in, according to these hidden Clinton Foundation disclosures, which are filed in multiple states, were probably filed with the IRS, may have been filed around the world, but are certainly not on the Clinton Foundation website. Almost 100% of all the incoming disclosed grants went to this Old Chai, because why would you give money to a massage parlor and research center out in Little Rock that's already been built? It doesn't need money, right? But this HIV/AIDS stuff, that's kind of sexy, right?
Well, the mini golf course and the
hanging
liquor,
gardens
they're
and
making a lot of money at the strip club there.
Right. So then we look at this. So the total amount of grants that supposedly went to Old Chai, you see in the rightmost column, $307 million of total grants went to Old Chai. And Fabien's absolutely right. Down at the second to bottom, 297 million of the grants came from Unitaid, in theory. Okay, but even these numbers aren't right, because we have found evidence of grants to Old Chai that significantly exceed a total of 307 million in this time frame. Okay, so they can't even lie properly, right? I mean, and anyway, so on the one hand, we see almost 99% of all the incoming grants, by their reckoning, from governments went to Old Chai, right?
What happened to the 1.02% that was left over, Charles?
Chelsea's got to live. And then if you look at the total Chai expenses, all right, Old Chai expenses are 405 million.
Wow.
Now that's because these are grants.
What the hell are they doing for 405
Exactly.
million?
And you look at this grant number is not the total revenue of Old Chai. There's other revenue to Old Chai, so the loss wasn't 100 million on Old Chai, but $400 million to spend in 3 years is a lot of money, let alone 600 million, right? And we look at this, and so Old Chai, this entity that didn't exist according to the IRS form that was filed December 31st, 2009, is responsible for 100% of the incoming government grants in this time frame, and for 2/3 of the total expenses spent by the Clinton Foundation from 2007 to 2009. Yet, with a straight face, the Clinton Foundation goes to crooked Lois Lerner's department and puts in an application under penalties of perjury saying, New Chai is not a successor to Old Chai. Oh, no. We haven't done anything like this before, right?
It's a whole new scheme.
And then you go through the balance sheet, the ending cash of Old Chai was, on average, 64% of the total amount of cash in the total foundation. So it clearly was material to the operation of the Clinton Foundation. It clearly, in theory, existed, right?
Wait, what does that mean, ending cash? Is that like profit?
No, ending cash is just, when you put a balance sheet together, most people, when they run something, care a lot about how much cash they have at the end of a reporting period. Fabien was talking about annual reporting. So this is when you strike your year-end balance sheet. That's when you measure how well you or how poorly you did. This entity that didn't exist held 64% on average of the total amount of cash that was inside the Clinton Foundation. And we're not talking about nothing. We're talking about 85 million in total cash, 129 million in total cash. You're talking about a lot of money was inside an entity that didn't exist. So that's probably why United didn't get any information from Old Chai, and it's probably why the Cour des Comptes didn't get any information from Old Chai, the Clinton Foundation, or United, on what was really going on. And then you look at, this is really perplexing. The total amount that is declared by the Clinton Foundation as having been spent on drugs, okay, is $212 million over this 3-year period. That's a lot of money to spend on drugs.
Does that include Roger Clinton?
I don't know. I don't know if that's drugs they just bought or drugs they manufactured, net of drugs they bought.
Drugs bought in a hotel room from the FBI?
Right. But you look at this, and that's a large amount of money. And when you do an audit, for a charity like the Clinton Foundation that operates internationally, if you do a valid audit and you fill in your tax forms properly, you're supposed to file granular detail on stuff like this. And you're also supposed to, for all your international operations, normally you're required to provide to the IRS local currency financial statements, exchange rates, and reconcile it all back into the total. They've done none of that, right? So remember we said in the beginning, the function of United was to find established organizations, didn't do that, and give them money that would mostly go for the drugs, didn't do that, and have precious little go to overhead. United gave $297 million in total to the Clinton Foundation in this period, but they only spent the Clinton Foundation $213 million on drugs. And the Gates Foundation gave money for the same purpose, substantial money. The Children's Investment Fund Foundation gave money. Other foreign governments gave, Norway gave money, Australia gave money. Lots of people gave money that didn't end up in the books. And we have the Cour des Comptes looking at this, trying to look at this, not seeing it. We have the Clinton Foundation probably during this broadcast saying, I wish we never happened. But the Clinton Foundation, as a trustee, you're responsible, as an auditing firm, an accounting firm, a legal firm, you're responsible for telling the truth about a foundation like this that's out there fundraising. You can't do what they actually did do, or what happens to you? You go to federal prison, like Corinne Brown is now celebrating her first week. She's getting ready to enjoy her first full week. So
she's there now, right?
She's in federal prison right now. I don't know where. But this is, I don't know, Fabien, if you'd seen these numbers before, but this is just disgraceful.
First time, which, they're very telling, for sure. Yeah. They're very telling. And, that will probably lead me a bit later when you need it into what basically Cour des Comptes has failed to do.
All right. We're going to keep going. We're going to close with that, Fabien, because I want to give you 2 more slides and then we'll get into that.
Okay.
There's 2 more.
Okay,
right. Is this 10? Yeah, okay.
This is 9, huh?
Now we're on 10.
And we're on 10, yeah. The key nations.
All right, so this is a slightly different number that they have in the Cour des Comptes report, but for the period 2006 to 2009 only, not 10 and 11. What we do here is we lay out, there's 2 types of drugs in this time frame that the money was supposed to be spent for. One, United said, we want you to buy drugs to help children who may have AIDS. Now, the concept of children having HIV/AIDS is a very dangerous concept because HIV is transmitted principally by intravenous drug use, by unprotected sex.
Well, but the parents, I guess.
Well, well before 2006, progress had been made in curtailing the transmission of mother to child.
Wow.
How? By different means.
Wow.
And so the point here is all these countries, now India is the only one that's not in Africa here, but when you think about it, these are mostly large population countries. So there shouldn't be wide discrepancies between the prevalence or the existence of patients, children who need HIV/AIDS drugs, and what are called second-line AIDS drugs. Second-line, first-line drugs are the drugs that work commonly through the adult population, but there are a percentage, and it varies country by country and type of person by type of person, where those first-line drugs just don't work. And you've got to get a more powerful set of drugs, these second-line drugs. Both of these drugs, I'm told from reading journals, are very dangerous drugs. This is not like saying, why don't you, I don't know, try, aspirin's actually dangerous.
Right.
This is not aspirin.
Right. And I was going to say aspirin even is a little dangerous, believe it or not.
But can I anticipate what you're going to say? Without proper doctors, just sending these drugs there does almost no good.
Well, it's not only that it doesn't do good. Most of the people who have these type of diseases in Africa, in places where there's crap water.
Yeah, no water.
I didn't use the word. Where there's the Trump word that got him in trouble. There's no electricity. The drugs can't be stored properly. There are no doctors. There are no roads. The populations are scattered to the winds.
So giant boxes of pharmaceuticals arrive and sit there.
Well, no, because these drugs can be sold in the black market. So, you ship this stuff in. These drugs actually are, though the prices have gone down, are valuable and fungible. So there's a big black market in these type of drugs around the world. And so you ship, in the first country, let's look at that one, Zambia. You ship $43 million worth of medicine into Zambia, which is, you got Switzerland up here, which is not as pristine as it once was. Zambia is down, in the sub basement to this building in terms of corruption. You ship $43 million worth of, highly marketable drugs into a Zambia, and you can be very sure that not much of it is actually going to get into the bush. But look at the relationship here. 29% of the value that went in there was pediatric drugs, 71% second-line drugs. Now look at Tanzania, where it's almost the reverse. 65% is pediatric and 35% second-line drugs. That doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be that wide a variation.
From country to country?
It shouldn't be, no. Over this long time frame.
What do you think that indicates?
What I think it indicates is where these numbers are high for pediatric, as a guess, it's a made-up number. They wanted to cover off stolen drugs. They just said, we spent that amount of money, extra money on pediatric drugs. Because you think about it, pediatric drugs for children with HIV/AIDS, it shouldn't be 65% of the drugs that go. I mean, children are, sadly, some are having sex against their will, but they're not these are non-sexually active ages. You're talking about infants to 9 in that time frame. How could you be getting HIV/AIDS from sex, and you're probably not using drugs yet, at that time frame? So it seems like a very high number, particularly when you get down into here to Malawi, 81%, Mozambique, 67%, Zimbabwe. They just look very suspiciously high. Now, also bear in mind that these amounts that we're talking about, why is 42 million going into Zambia and only 12 into Ethiopia? Ethiopia is a lot bigger country in terms of population. Ethiopia is about 100 million people. And so you start looking at this just purely from, as Fabien and I are principally numbers people, you just look at this thing and the variations don't make any sense and should raise, major red flags. And of course, none of these numbers, appear in any Clinton Foundation filings. This is from the Cour des Comptes that we get these numbers. And in most of these African countries, there's a system set up, most of the ones that are based on, and also in India, the countries that are based on, model on English law, all have pretty strict local requirements of what you have to do. When you set up a charity, you've got to register. If it's a health-related charity, you got to register with the health-related people. Typically, you have to set up a local not-for-profit entity. And to pay off the government officials, and some would say, and others would say, to make sure that they're properly looked after, you've got to generally have Tanzanian directors, nationals, on the Tanzanian subsidiary. You can't just say it's only going to be Ira Magaziner. And to pick on Tanzania a little bit, we have to remember that in this time frame in Tanzania, around this precise time frame, that there was a special investigation of Tanzanian aid And the situation was so bad in Tanzania that the head of the central bank, I think, and the finance minister were the ones stealing money from incoming aid, the very people who were supposed to regulate it. So, you see numbers like this, it doesn't take much. And I'm not casting aspersions just simply on the African continent or on India. I mean, it's a very dangerous thing to send this amount of money towards countries that don't have the infrastructure to absorb it, where they're greedy, crooked politicians, perhaps trained at the Clinton School of Public Service, engaged in this thing. So on the surface level, numbers people like Fabien and I are going to look at this and say, whoa, this just doesn't smell right.
Charles, I remember one of the first episodes we did dealt with Malawi, and the president of Malawi was in jail for fraud or something.
Right. Well, I mean, I think if you apply, Fabien, we joke about this, Ortel's first law. You take anything, connected to the Clintons, you put that thing in, so Malawi, you put Malawi into Google with the word fraud, and you will always be rewarded with a smile, because we can try it now if you want. Mm-hmm. We can see if it works. Watch it not work. But so we just Malawi fraud, embassies fraud, minister said you could actually. I think it was if you put in Banda. I think Banda. I think was the president. No, or that's fine. Also Malawi though. Well, that's Zambia. I thought there was, who was?
Well, we could do that another time.
We'll do it another time. But there's a Malawian leader who was in trouble with fraud, and there's
we covered it in a previous episode.
So if we then go to the next page, and this is where once we're almost done here, Fabien. I've grouped this slightly differently than you've seen in the past, and what we do here is we take the top 3 donations, so France, the United Kingdom, and Norway, year by year, period by period. France sent $268 million into UNITAID in 2006 and 7. 2006 was only a little bit. Most of it went in 2007. That was 73% of all the money that UNITAID got was from France. The United Kingdom sent $26 million, and that's 7%. Norway, 21. You add those amounts up, the 3 biggest donors account for the lion's share of the donations to this UNITAID, right? So France, I would say if I were looking at this, France bears the greatest responsibility for disciplining this UNITAID fraud because they're giving a majority of the money to UNITAID. But the top 3, taken all together, are like 86% of the whole period is from these top 3 countries. And what's remarkable to me is, France had you could say France had the good sense to drop its percentage. From the first year it was 73 down to 62. How do you explain England? How do you explain England just precisely when this fraud was metastasizing and being discovered, being investigated by the Cour des Comptes? The English say, oi there, I'm going to increase. I could do this. I'll put more money in. I'll go from 26 million up to 85 million in 2011 at the height of the fraud. What were they thinking? So I don't want to just pick on England. And, by reputation, the Norwegians are supposed to be, everyone's different, but Norwegians have a reputation for being incredibly stingy and careful with money.
Really?
Absolutely, yeah. And so you look at 7%, 109, this is 109 million into UNITAID, of which a lot went to the Clinton Foundation. And because I would argue the Clinton Foundation thing was a disaster, that should taint all of UNITAID. All of UNITAID's projects are tainted. So why did there's some big questions here that are not yet answered. Why did the French government choose to sort of paper over the problem and let it get even worse in later years? Why did the UK government increase its support, right? And why did Norway not only send this money to Chai, but on top of that, send additional money to charities that don't exist run by the Clinton Foundation, like the Clinton Climate Initiative, that might be able to fight climate change if it actually existed, both climate change and this entity. but it doesn't. So with that, Fabien, this is sort of an overview, and we need to do several more presentations on this because there's a lot more nitty-gritty. But we've been going now for an hour and 53 minutes, and I'm mindful that, you know, you're happily married, and I don't want to keep you away too long from your lovely wife. But maybe if you could give us some concluding thoughts, Fabien. You were going to tell us something about Cour des Comptes and Unitate, I think.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, because your figures are extremely telling and quite impressive as in terms of the strong message they carry. Now, I told you that Cour des Comptes was a respected body, which personally I've been knowing for 30 years. I have quite a few friends, in fact, quite a number of friends working in it. Now, they missed, obviously, a big portion of the story. What did they miss first? And then I'm trying to find an explanation of why they missed it. Although I don't have one. So what did they miss? First, you know, they only mention what Charles and I call in our jargon new chai. So new chai is the so-called Clinton health initiative. Okay. Clinton it's a foundation. It's a Clinton Foundation Health Initiative. It's the second body created in September 2009, effective January 1st, 2010, into which the Clinton Foundation split its Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative program, and bearing in mind that that program was supposedly the result of a merger which never happened in 2006 with the old CHI, so the old so-called Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. So, you know, basically, Cour des Comptes only mentions this so-called new CHI, but never old CHI. Now, as I told you, looking at annual reports, looking at board minutes, it's already quite telling. Now, just looking at annual reports, that's what they call annual report in year 2007 and 2008, you know, and looking how they describe the body to which they sent $297 million in 3 years. Well, I've identified at least 7 different names for the same body. Okay, I quote them because it's interesting. And I even, you know, I can give you the page numbers and the line numbers of each page. So we have Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, which obviously is the name of the original old CHI foundation, and there's only the ink missing. Now, we also have Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, so without the term foundation. We have Clinton Foundation. We have even HIV/AIDS Initiative without Clinton or foundation in it. We have then the William G. Clinton Foundation. We also have the William G. Clinton Foundation HIV Initiative. That's a new body with a new name, which interesting semantic evolution. And then we have the Clinton Health Initiative, full stop. So this is how Unitate between 2006 and 2010 describes the body in which it sent close to 60% of its money. That's a joke. That's a serious one. That's a bad joke. Second thing, which Cour des Comptes failed to identify, is the so-called old CHI, in our jargon, so the first HIV/AIDS initiative entity. Well, it failed to identify its non-compliance to US charity and tax laws when incorporating, operating, and filing to state registries and the IRS. That's a problem. Now, I've tried to do the exercise myself. I'm not American. I sit in Japan, which is not exactly the closest spot to US state registries. Thank God there is the internet, but even with that, I promise you, it's not easy. It's a hell of a job, and Charles brilliantly went through that and dismantled bit by bit the information and reconstructed the entire picture. But it's complicated. Okay, so from the Cour des Comptes standpoint, sitting in 2010, they are supposed to investigate and audit, so-called audit, United, but not CHAI, so it's far over. Third thing they failed, third failure, is that they failed to identify what I would call the large tax risk unencumbered on donors as a result of unfounded deductions, but also on the Clinton Foundation for illegally operating a tax-exempt activity. Now, if the Clinton Foundation, whichever name you use, has been illegally operating, that has two sets of effects which are quite damaging. One on the donors, they have basically to pay taxes on all the donations they have sent, and which were exempted so far, but also the foundation has to pay corporate tax going backwards since its inception, and that has to be funded by somebody, and that somebody is usually the donors. So it is at risk of ending up having to fund some of the taxes that were not paid by the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, so
there's an interesting legal problem there. Now, going further, Cour des Comptes obviously did not get into what I call United's financial policy or transparency policy. And we discussed it already to some extent. Why do we have unaudited accounts for 2007? Why do we have unaudited accounts for 2008? And why do we have audited accounts covering 2 years instead of one each? And also, last probably thing that Cour des Comptes didn't really get into is the pure technical analysis of how United manages its board process and its board minutes. We already described that, but that's something Cour des Comptes can easily do, because I did it out of Japan in my closet, if I may say. Yeah? So Cour des Comptes, with at least 5 specialist investigators, could do it quite easily. They should have done it, and they haven't. Yeah? And as a conclusion, we have basically all the elements of a fraud. That's for sure. The problem is that fraud is going on under the cover or the disguise of humanitarian aid, but more importantly, under the legal cover of an international body called UN, and in this case, WHO. That has serious legal implications, and this is a matter on which I think lawyers need to sit, look into seriously. I don't know under US law how far can you launch proceedings against international civil servants who are covered and protected by UN immunities and privileges, as we discussed earlier. That is a serious issue from my standpoint. That needs to be addressed first before anything else moves. Because the FBI, if it starts looking into that, will, I think, have the same problem than Cour des Comptes.
Well, if I can end this portion of the presentation on a hopeful note, I would observe the following: that in a status quo situation where the bureaucrats in the UN and WHO assume that rising countries and France and the US and countries that have been around a bit longer in the economic scene are always going to be willing to throw money, to burn money by sending it to WHO, by paying their UN dues, etc. Having watched now 10, 15, 20 years where technology makes it ever cheaper to operate these bureaucracies, if you assume that France and the US and the UK and other big countries are just going to happily send more money to Switzerland to allow this kind of fraud to perpetuate itself, maybe you're right, Fabien. Maybe these bureaucrats will be protected. But on the other hand, the lawyers we have consulted tell us that as a matter of US law, the Clinton Foundation would not be immune from prosecution by dint of having some sort of cover through an arrangement with Unitaid, between Unitaid and an entity that legally doesn't exist in the United States. That doesn't work, right? You can't. But if you could do that, then everybody would be rushing to do business with the WHO, because that would be your get-out-of-jail-free card around the world. That's not going to work in the United States. While it may work in France, it may work in Switzerland, it certainly won't work under the Trump administration. That's one hopeful note. The second hopeful note is that the actual ultimate body here that would have the greatest exposure, I think, are the private foundations like the Gates Foundation that actually have a lot of money. By last account, I think the Gates Foundation had over $30 billion in unencumbered cash, which is more than enough money just from them to get your donations back that may have gone to the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS, because the Gates Foundation was centrally involved advising the UN on its HIV/AIDS fighting work starting in 2001, and centrally involved as a founding donor to this Unitaid. So it's going to be very difficult for the Gates to say, I'm Bill Gates, I'm really smart, I've got all these smart people around me, we're world experts on HIV/AIDS, we run the biggest foundation in the world, but we didn't notice what was happening because we're that smart. I mean, they're not going to have that defense. And then Microsoft and Gates and the companies that Gates is invested in are not going to be able to say, well, why don't we just ignore the countries, the major countries that fund the UN? Because, we can do a great business for Microsoft in, let's say, Estonia. And you're going to have to, if you're Microsoft, you're going to be worried if the UK, France, the US, et cetera, is chasing the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates. And indeed, Microsoft contributed to the Clinton Foundation. So I think there is a hopeful avenue navigating around whatever arrangements may, in theory, on paper, protect some of the people associated with the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. But Fabien, I really want to thank you for coming out of semi-retirement and doing all this hard work for so many months and years now. Really appreciate it. Jason, I hope you've enjoyed meeting Fabien this way. And
I just wanted to add something before you finish, okay? If I may. Just going back to this timeline, when Mr. Sarkozy was elected in 2007, a few months later, Mr. Deux was nominated advisor to the president while chairing Unitaid, which is very unusual. That's one element of inconsistency in the information we've talked out. And second thing, Mr. Deux in 2007 was not renewed as chairman of Unitaid. Now, I think medical professor at Harvard. So it should be easy to anyone to talk to him, basically.
Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fabien. Well, thanks so much for making your debut performance on this show. I know that Jason is doing a lot of important work, not simply on these matters, but on related matters. Now you're introduced. You can stay in close touch. We'll love to have you back on Sunday with Charles at some point. And I hope you enjoy a wonderful
And it's called, is it still called the, are you still calling it the French Connection?
We still are, very much so.
Okay.
Credit to our Japanese-based creative director.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fabien. And
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
all right.